mathematicians have announced the existence of a new whole number, which lies between 27 and 28. We don't know why it's there or what it does, said Cambridge mathematician Dr. Hilliard Halliard. We only know that it doesn't behave properly when put into equations, and that it is divisible by 6, though only once.
This is Tony Topping. You're listening to Off-Planet Radio.
The storm is coming, and when it is over, I fear there will be little left of our world.
You read your books about UFOs and Roswell and whacked-out theories and government conspiracies. I think that you want to believe. What makes you trust them?
I don't know. I'm a good judge of character.
Welcome to another dimension, a dimension of insight, a dimension of understanding. You are entering a place where reality collides with truth. There are no limits. There are no boundaries. This is Off-Planet Radio.
Welcome to Off-Planet Radio live on a Friday night somewhere in America, the Zionist-occupied east coast of the United States. I'm Randy Maugans. It is November the 7th, 2014. I really like the date. I found out years ago that my power numbers were 9, 11, and 7. Gosh, that didn't make me feel real well about the way 9/11 worked out, but okay. Numbers have inversions, as does everything that functions in this present universe. And a lot of the way that things function in this universe is in units of time, units of gravity, and quantum energy units. And somehow or another we'll work all of that into the conversation we're going to have tonight, because I want to talk about something kind of deep. A lot of people have described it as the end of the world. There's no such thing as the end of the world. The universe is a continually creative process. These are things that are even still hidden from science, because science is still based itself on destructive energy generation processes, such as nuclear, such as the processes that we use to destroy precious resources to create energy from carbon fuels. We basically live in the age of violent fusion, and we are moving into the age when energy will come to be realized as part of the gaps between the quanta, that we live in a continuously created universe which perpetually generates energy, perpetually generates matter, and perpetually generates consciousness. And a lot of people, especially those who may be of a religious persuasion, which I have been from time to time in my life, tend to believe that we're now in the great smackdown of humanity, that God's coming back to judge us, that this place needs to be ripped apart, that certain people are better than other people. There are chosen people, and then there's the rest of you poor bastards out there who will probably get smashed by something or destroyed or blown up or beheaded, executed by your government, starvation, jailed in a FEMA camp, all of the horrible things that people imagine become, I guess, sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Look at the world we live in now. Look at the world of created wars, perpetual wars, silent wars, quiet wars. Look at the world that forces us to continuously and I'm sorry, it looks like my stream's dropping out. Gosh, what's going on with that? The world that's continuously in a state of meltdown. We really don't get what's going on with the system of the planet. We don't really get what's going on in the spiritual dynamics. We don't really understand that we have enormous power as human beings. We have the ability to create and destroy. We have the ability to, within our own consciousness and our own intellect, be as gods. Oh, the religious people will really take umbrage at that, but I'm sorry, it's written inside your own Bible. It was spoken in the book of Psalms, and it was spoken by Jesus. Did I not tell you in your law that you are gods? And so humanity continues to slave under the position of being this tiny little creature that must be ruled over by elites, by reptilian beings, by Syrians, by gods, by governments. But what's really going on in the planet and what's really going on in the consciousness of humanity has much to do with this very arcane thing we call time. Time itself is actually an abstraction layer. People who know computer programming know that in programming there are high-level languages and there are low-level languages, and between the two lie what's called the abstraction layer, the ability to basically take code and work it together in ways that are unique and novel using software. Time is like that. It's generated in the consciousness. It's generated as a result of the interaction of particles, which we still have not determined as being exactly precise, but we might call them quarks, we might call them neutrinos, we might call it dark matter. The science breaks down at the subquantum level. It breaks down at the super macro level as well. We understand time by understanding our own consciousness. We understand time because it exists within our own minds and because we need something to calculate movement, which is basically what time is. What time actually operates in is a domain. It is a time domain as a mediator of physical space, three-dimensional space-time. Without it, we would have what would largely be called limbo or oblivion or unconsciousness, but actually that's only from the human perspective anyway, because people who have experienced near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences know that you leave the body and you experience something that sits outside of the solid realm of space and time, and that thing is not quantifiable anymore. It operates in the spaces between the quantum. Time is a domain that dictates certain aspects of consciousness upon the planet and also the cycles of our planets themselves, the galactic bodies into which we are spun as part of this supernatural, supermaterial matrix. And the point I'm trying to get to is that many people are perplexed right now by what is going on. If you've lived any period of time in this planet, if you have lived a life, I would say, of at least 40 years, but probably preferably 50 or more, you have the sense that things have shifted sharply in your lifetime. You have seen the erosion of your cultures, and I don't care where you live. Pretty much the entire world at this point is interconnected. And whereas maybe a few decades ago, certainly 40, 50 years ago, certain cultures were far detached from the Western mindset, that's no longer true. The collective consciousness today is highly integrated, tightly linked, largely because we now live in a global village. It's a global village that is part of what was predicted, prophesied, by a gentleman who lived very early in the 20th century named Teilhard de Chardin, who predicted something called the noosphere, the interconnecting of human consciousness. Chardin anticipated the internet by nearly 100 years. Chardin understood that within the time domains, there was a time coming when human consciousness would begin to coalesce. I don't think he understood completely that it would happen electronically, but I believe that his contemporaries in that time did understand that. They did understand that human consciousness was being connected. The erosion of the cultures, the changing of the cultures, the base nature of humanity has shifted incredibly. In what I like to call sharp contrast. If you've ever seen a black and white TV, I'll date myself and say that I grew up as a little kid watching a black and white TV. There was a dial on the TV. It was called a contrast button, and basically, if you turned it to the left, it got darker, and to the right, it got lighter. And on either side of the dial was the extreme. On one side was the whiteout, where you just had a white screen. On the other side, it went completely black. Somewhere in the middle of that were all of the gradients between black and white, the gray pixels, the spectrum. That's contrast. What we've seen in the culture, what we've seen in the world, is that contrast is now sharper. It has now been fine-tuned to where the distinction is only between black and white. Where black and white is no longer the complete... I'm sorry, I just looked at my stream and I realized once again we're losing our network, and I apologize for this. I'm having network problems tonight, but we'll keep going with the recording, and hopefully you'll stay with us as we connect. My point being that evil is now evil to the nth degree, and yet at the same time, light itself is beginning to rise within the consciousness of humanity at a degree that I think balances it. I would estimate, for instance, based on being able to communicate with people around the world, that probably about 5% of humanity is in some state of awakening right now. That means that 97% of humanity is in some part of the spectrum of the gray, mostly trending towards the black. But the balance between all of this is that light dominates darkness. In religion, we call this good and bad. We call it evil. We call it the God force. We call it yin yang. it doesn't really matter what you call it. What we're looking at is an energetic transformation that's taking place across the planet. And that energetic transformation is part of the shifting of human consciousness, which is what we talked about back in 2012 a lot on this show. We talked a lot about the fact that we basically, at that time, were looking for a shift. And I believe that in a large degree that shift did occur, but I think most of it was invisible because at that time we were not fully able to comprehend the dynamics of what was going on. And I'm sorry, we just pulled the stream back in, so hopefully we've got a good connection here. I'm doing a radio show and engineering at the same time, and I'm watching my bandwidth drop out. Something's screwing with my internet connection tonight. All of that leads me to where I want to go tonight. I want to talk about the cosmic clock. I want to talk about where we are. I want to talk about the potential for humanity. Because right now, a lot of people are wrapped up in fatalism and doom and gloom. But because I'm a spiritualist, because I believe that there is a balance in the universe, and because I believe that there is an intelligence behind creation, call it God if you have to, call it the universe, call it the force. Some people are offended by that. Christians tell me that I should be pronouncing the name of Jesus, and to them I just say this: if you know God, you cannot give him a name, and if you don't know God, no name will serve as an introduction. When I was a child, I even then understood that we lived in a very special time. I had that feeling, I had that sense. Because I grew up during the 60s and 70s, I got to witness the revolution that took place in the 1960s that sort of spilled over into the 70s. The 70s were kind of like a bad hangover from years of really good drugs. So we didn't really get the full party in my generation, but what we did get was a perspective about what had happened there. And I grew up in a small town where I think things arrived like maybe 5 years later. So we were actually hippies in the 70s as kids. And that's the way it is when you grow up in a small town. But we've seen the shift coming for a long time. There have been people that have seen this coming for thousands of years, hundreds of years, a century, decades. The elites have known for a long time that this was coming. And believe me, they fear what's coming. This is why they're building the huge underground bases, the deep underground military bases, why they're building cities underground and under the ocean, why they're obsessed with astrology and dark arts, because they too are attempting to determine the clock cycles of the universe. They know it's coming. And it's like the quiet that happens before a huge attack. You can hear a twig snap in the distance, and it sounds like a cannon. That is the collective conscious state of humanity right now. Humanity sits like a hair trigger, waiting for that next shoe to fall, the next false flag event to hit, the next event that will shake their consciousness and grind them even further down into the low energy strata of their mental state. The whole point of the fear porn that goes on the internet, on the major news, from the White House, from the Congress, from FEMA, from DHS, it's the next panic about what's going to kill you. When you are in fear, you are not at peace, and you are not centered in the heart where you can begin to operate effectively through your own consciousness. Your own consciousness is capable of being the navigator to whatever horrific event they want to throw at you, or whatever event is to be the next turn in this galactic shift that we're going through. And I talked about contrast a few minutes ago. And I don't do this very often anymore, but years ago on shortwave radio, I did a show on Bible prophecy. I spent 7 years studying the Bible, but also studying other esoteric works as well, and we're going to talk about that in the show tonight. But in the book of Isaiah, chapter 60, it has this very interesting description of the times that we live in now. It says, "Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall rise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee." Those two verses are written from what you would call the Hebrew perspective. But what they describe is actually a prophetic pronouncement of events that we're living in now. It is the contrast. The gross darkness is very real and very palpable. You can sense evil. You can sense the heaviness, the ambience of an atmosphere and environment. You ever walk into a dark place? You ever go somewhere and you feel like you're going to suffocate because the air itself is so still and so putrid? Have you ever gone somewhere and sensed around you a deep, abiding sense of weariness? Maybe not fear, apprehension. Like the shadows themselves are 3D. And if you've ever heard any of my shows about the shadow people, you'll know that I know that that's all very real. That there are entities that cohabit this space with us in dimensions very close to the three-dimensional world that manifest. And so that gives you a sense of gross darkness, deep darkness, this oppression, this sense that on this planet, something very different is occurring. In a lot of ways, I feel like I straddled two worlds because I grew up in the relative ease of the late 60s and early 70s. It was still pretty good times. We had survived the Vietnam War, the Kennedys being assassinated, the death of Martin Luther King. We had survived Nixon, Watergate. We had survived the first of a series of deep recessions that would occur as we were going off of the gold standard and the changing up of the laws and the currencies in this country, but it was still pretty good times. And those times would boom and bust over the next 20 years. I mean, remember the 80s? Remember the 90s? Remember the tech era? Remember the tech bubble? Where we started to live in the microseconds of economies as clocks and computers grew faster. We began to measure our own beingness in milliseconds, in the clock cycles inside of a CPU. Now we're back to time again. But isn't it interesting, isn't it telling, that our consciousness shifts in synchronous with rhythms of the universe? A consciousness created the CPU and the computer. A consciousness created technology based on silicon wafers. A consciousness enables us to peer into the window of a computer and to speak into the microphone and reach around the planet and touch people around the globe. Teilhard de Chardin and the noosphere. So we have this sense that We are connected and yet we're disconnected. We're fractured. We're fragmented. We're experiencing darkness, and yet at this time, there is also an abiding sense that somewhere, deep inside this collective consciousness of humanity, is also a light that is very brilliant and very abiding, and is able to pierce through even the darkest nights, to pierce through even the darkest souls of the human race. All of the things that we touch upon, the politics, the economics, the psycho-warfare that occurs around the planet, the power plays, the police state, all of those things are secondary to the processing in our own consciousness and in our own hearts. The more critical information contained between the quantum. When we retune ourselves to the higher frequencies, when we give off our fear, when we shake off the sense that we are small, that we are powerless, that we are incapable of dealing with the darkness around us, when we get still enough to, for a moment, realize that we are part of the sine wave, the breathing in and exhaling of the universe. Is that too cosmic? Is that too abstract? Do we need a formula for that? Do we need a bumper sticker for it? Do we need a slogan? Do we need to put out an ad campaign? Or is it that we need to begin to connect to the inner part of ourselves for a moment and then begin to filter the external data through our consciousness spam filter? There's a good metaphor. The consciousness spam filter. Because we let a lot of crap into our consciousness. We contaminate ourselves. We pull ourselves down. We are energetic beings. We operate on an energetic level. We breathe in. We breathe out. We breathe in air. We breathe air out. We take light in. And yes, we also radiate light. Fact that has been proven in genetics experiments, that at our DNA level, we are radiating light, and that we ourselves are part of this spectrum, the continuum between dark and light, but at the same time, a whole spectrum of colors that the eyes themselves cannot see. These are the things that are inside of us that we need to tap into in order to deal with the things that are coming. Because the darkness, this gross darkness that this ancient Hebrew prophet talked about, is upon us, and we need to begin to focus on the light. We're going to take a break here and come back on the other side. I want to talk a little bit more about the cosmic clockwork and where we are in this present period of time. This is Off-Planet Radio. Second half of Off-Planet Radio Live for November 7th, 2014. I'm Randy Maugans. in what is basically kind of a incoherent rant. I hope not. Gosh. The thoughts come so fast, and I think a lot of times what happens is I get downloads, and it all sounds brilliant inside my head, and then I try to bring it out of my mouth. This is why a lot of times I like to interview people, because I think there's a great deal of clarity that comes from conversations. The cosmic clockwork operates on levels that we don't understand. I talked in the first part about how we basically today measure our consciousness in clock cycles that are dwindling down to milliseconds, microseconds, the cycles of a CPU. But the order of our universe, and I use that term advisedly because the universe itself is actually part of another universe. We don't understand that we live in a multi-dimensional, multi-universal, layer upon layer, like one of those Russian nesting dolls. That's the type of reality that we live in. Can you prove that scientifically? Not yet. Because science only seeks to validate the things that it can quantize, analyze, scrutinize, and publicize. But I don't operate in the hard sciences. I operate in the area of intuition, of empathic information, of information that comes from sources that are more felt than touched. But I want to talk about the cosmic clockwork from another level, because in order to understand any of this, we need to understand the order of things. Over the years, I've been privileged to have had actually mentors and teachers, people who have taught me things. And I've told the story before of when I was 15 years old, I was mentored for a while by a Gnostic, a man who literally did call himself Gnosis. He was a mystic. He was also kind of a wizard, and he also had a dark side as well. I eventually had to move away from him because, unfortunately, spiritual power can be corrupted, and people who attempt to control other people tend to go to the dark side. Go watch Star Wars. I've also been extraordinarily privileged to have been given information that a lot of people have never seen. And several years ago, I received a package in my post office box as a result of a radio show that I had done, and I got to know a man whom I later came to know as simply the living being. And he introduced me to some very esoteric material from an order called the Sanctilians. The Sanctilians, as nearly as I can tell, existed through the early to middle part of the 20th century. It appears as though, at least from the 1930s, certainly the 1940s, onward to the 1980s, they operated an educational university, basically, that did mail-order courses, but also had a component to it of one-on-one teaching. And they operated largely in Arizona and parts of California. And they were called the Sanctilean Order. And you can go on the internet and look up Sanctilean. That's Sanctilean. And you will find reference to two books that are still available. One is called The Impending Golden Age, a critical analysis of the world's sickness and its cure in 1948. The other one is much more interesting to me in terms of the work that I've been doing for the last 9 years. It's called Flying Saucers, Portents of These Last Days. The Sanctilean Order ceased to exist in the early 1980s. They closed up their university. They had been an established, accredited educational 501c3, and their books had been published into the Library of Congress. They were on record as existing, but as of the early 1980s, they folded up shop and disappeared. The man who I got to know a brief time, named Living Being, was, as far as I know, one of the last remaining teachers. He was quite aged and in declining health when I met him, and he later passed away. I will say that he passed on. But he made it possible for me to get to know this material. And again, you can go onto the internet and find The Impending Golden Age by Sanctilean. It's available on Amazon. The other book that I just referenced, Flying Saucers, is a little more difficult to find. I was just looking to see. It looks like there may still be printed copies out there. There's a publishing company that does republish what is apparently outdated works, and we've not determined yet whether some of the Sanctilean works are covered by copyright or not, because I've wanted to be able to use it to post in some articles, and there's no one available for me to contact to receive permission anymore. So that's made it rather difficult as well for me to be able to write on this, which is something I still hope I'm going to be able to do. But I want to read a little bit from these two particular publications. Flying Saucers, Portents of These Last Days, which was published in 1950, which is interesting because the modern UFO era begins in 1947, and it seems as though the Sanctileans were already documenting UFO activity in the 1930s, and they were connecting it to what occurred at the opening of the atomic age, the detonation of nuclear blasts. But let's go into this a little bit. In the book on Flying Saucers, this is called Our Solar System is Now Rising into Super Physical Realms from the Sanctileans. And they write, prophecy relative to a time in the far distant future when the earth and its heavens shall be rolled up as in a scroll of fire refers to a much later phase of the continuing process of radiative disintegration of the physical existence. This will be the result of its increasing vibratory frequency incident to the continuing approach of our Sanctile Cosmodon to the regium of the Arcturian sun. Now let me stop here for a minute because these are arcane terms. We're presently in the period of time of what many people have called galactic center. In fact, what you will come to understand as we go through some of this material is it's not galactic center. It is simply the galaxy itself moving into the outer realms of the invisible supersun, the supersun that we can't see anymore, but which has been hinted at by mystics from many ages. And so we are presently in that arc. We've been there. Best calculations I've seen indicate 1918 when we began. This would also correlate as well to what is commonly called the Age of Aquarius, the moving out of the Piscean Age, which was the age when the man named Jesus came, who manifested the Christ into this present creation cycle. So I'll go on here. With every passing day at this time, the whole solar system and the entire Sanctile Cosmodon of which it is a part are being lifted into higher levels of being. With respect to our solar system, this lifting into higher levels of vibratory frequency is not only incident to the return of our Sanctile Cosmodon to the center of the universe, but to the approach of our solar system to the regium of the central sun Vela, which is solely the cause of the closing, impending, recurrent golden age. Most people understand that we've gone through many ages, although Christianity has attempted to represent that the planet itself is only 4,000 years old. That's ridiculous. The planet is hundreds of millions years old. And as you go into the geographic records, as you go into the geologic records, you begin to understand that this planet has gone through many changes, many ages, many cataclysms, both of a cosmic level and of an internal level, because the Earth itself at its core is a spinning magnetic mass, influenced by planetary aspects from the galactic bodies themselves. I'll continue reading here. As a consequence of the heightening of the vibratory frequency of the whole Earth, its humanity is being lifted continuously into objective contact with levels of being and consciousness never before mundanely encountered. It is as if, for example, no one on Earth had ever seen eagles flying in the sky until suddenly the ability to see them had developed during the last few years. The upper threshold of man's contact with the superphysical is rising. That which formerly was above his upper threshold of cognizance is coming into his range of objective recognition, but he is unaware that his upper threshold of objective vision is rising. This is actually what we would call rising consciousness or awakening. Spiritual progress is the extension of one's outer limit of objective cognition. Today, the whole humanity of Earth is advancing a little spiritually, when it could advance rapidly if it were to ally itself with cosmic actuality. We live upon the lower level of a threefold world. Every astronomical unit, moons, planets, suns, and supersuns, is comprised of three concentric spheres of different sizes and vibratory frequencies. Its vibratory frequency determines its astronomical status as a moon, planet, sun, or supersun, and its size. Moons and planets shine with infrared light. Suns shine with mundanely visible light. Supersuns shine with ultraviolet light and hence are mundanely invisible. In other words, they're there, but they're beyond the visible spectrum which the human eye can presently observe, even with advanced technology. In their order of increasing size and vibratory frequency, the three concentric spheres comprising an astronomical unit called a muton are the regium, the aurium, and the magium. The regium of the Earth is the dense ball of land and sea and air whereupon and wherein we drive our cars, sail our ships, and fly our planes. The aurium of the Earth is a larger ball wherein men and women live after the change, called death, in their initial preparation for re-embodiment into the physical world. The outer surface of the Earth aurium is called paradise, or Paradias, as it's written in the Sanctilean literature. In the Aramaic or Aramaic, para meaning around and dias meaning earth. The magium of the Earth is a still larger ball wherein men and women live after they have advanced beyond paradise in their further preparations for re-embodiment into the physical world. The outer surface of the Earth, called the magium, is called etern in the Aramaic, in other words, the internal part. The outer surfaces of these three spheres are the natural habitat of men and women during their embodiment cycle. When they are embodied in their fourfold bodies of Hyle, Sheely, Silva, and Etern substances, they should live on the outer surfaces of the regium of our Earth in what is called Hyle, or physical existence. This is actually the derivation here where you get the word hell or Hades. When they are embodied only in their Silva and Etern bodies, having lost their Hyle and Sheely bodies at the time of physical death, they should live on in the outer surface of the aurium of our Earth in paradise. Now, That sounds like a very strange description of our planet because we can't see most of this. But in fact, the habitations of departed souls is a place that sits superphysically outside of the planet itself. This is the place of what we would call the dead. It's pretty flippin' weird, but having done psychic contact work and having actually worked with the recently deceased, I can tell you that there is a transition, a crossover that occurs when human beings depart. It's a very sacred thing. So what we just went through there is a very brief description of the three parts that correlate to the cosmologic, the physical, and the human existence on these spheric plane levels. In other words, we recognize multi-level creation, multi-level existence, multi-level transitions. The cosmic clock that we are presently living in is heading to a cycle climax. They've called it the end of the age, the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, although the world is being changed. It's being reformed. We're told right now that we have global warming, but in fact, the literature that I've examined, which is both scientific and anecdotal dating back now over 60 years, indicates that we've been in a cooling cycle since the 1930s, probably longer than that. I remember reading, and I wish I could find this article, back in the mid-1970s, probably 75, 76, Rolling Stone magazine did a huge article written by a pretty prominent scientist. I'm going to have to go track this down, talking about the impending ice age. That's right. In the 1970s, when we first began talking about climate change, we weren't talking about global warming. We weren't talking about carbon dioxide gas. We weren't talking about the things that were affecting the atmosphere coming from the emissions from our automobiles or our factories. We were talking then about a different effect that basically presaged a new ice age. And in fact, the Earth itself is cooling. What we don't understand is the heating cycles that result from a cooling cycle. As insane as it sounds, we're now seeing scientists that are almost having to reverse themselves because they can't prove anymore that the Earth's heating up. We're actually seeing the reappearance of glaciers in parts of the North Pacific and up into the Arctic Circle. We're not seeing the attrition of these glaciers anymore, and in fact what we're seeing is a recoalescing. It's noted that in some parts of the world now the Gulf Stream has changed as a result of climatic changes. These are not global warming. They are not caused by humanity. Our ability to impact our Earth is considerable, but this is a natural process. Going back into the Sanctilean material for a minute, I'm just going to note, because we'll never get through this material in this show, the point of flying saucers, Portents of These Last Days, what is basically a very early book on UFOs, has to do with what we call flying saucers or UFOs being basically creatures, entities, and craft that have been materialized as a result of our own detonation of nuclear bombs on this planet since 1942. It has literally torn holes into the cosmos. It has literally ripped into the space-time fabric, and it has literally disturbed the outer abodes of the living souls who are departed. And you can take that for whatever it's worth. That's the thesis of this book. As somebody who's studied UFOs for most of my life, frankly, I can tell you that it is not a coincidence that we began to see the rise in extraterrestrial craft, UFO activity and the stories of contacts, abductions, and other encounters with beings who we would call extraterrestrials occurring in the period post-World War II. I don't think it's lost on anybody that we've seen what can only be called a mind-boggling explosion in technology in the last 60 years. That we've seen the time when we've gone from the transistor radio of post-World War II to computers that contain millions of transistors on a wafer you can hold in your hand, to what we talked about the earliest part of this show tonight, which is the connectedness in the consciousness that's occurring as a result of the internet, but also what the Sanctilean literature is talking about as this arising consciousness, and how humanity is basically now struggling to attain a place of consciousness equal to the advancement of our own galactic movements. The point being that we're not fatalists. We're not saying the world's going to end, God's going to come, he's going to destroy the world, he's going to murder and butcher billions of people, and then you're going to be judged. The planet is changing, and it will continue to change. And as these changes advance, I think we're going to find that we need to rely on our spiritual senses. We need to tune into who we really are, and we need to be able, like the animals on this planet, to attune more to the rhythms and the movements of the planet itself. Because there is no inorganic matter. Everything is living. Everything is alive. Everything is a projection of intelligence, consciousness, and the manifestation of thought, which brings the material into existence. Go out and walk on the earth. Take your shoes off. Yeah, it's cold out right now. I know. Here on the East Coast, it's in the 30s tonight, and winter is coming. Make contact with the earth. Make contact with the air. Begin to project yourself out to make contact with other souls, other spirits. This is a freedom-based network that we're on, the Liberty Beacon Network. And we talk a lot about GMOs, and we talk about vaccines, we talk about the Illuminati, the New World Order. All of that stuff is important. All of it needs to be said. But at the end of the day, what do we do with all this knowledge if all we do is have doom and gloom? If all we can do is bemoan our masters whom we serve when we ourselves hold incredible power, both in our own lives and collectively in guiding this planet to where it is going next. You can call it a new age. You can call it Aquarius. You can call it the Golden Age. You can call it the dawn of a new humanity. We are changing as human beings. We are changing physically. We are changing mentally. We are changing spiritually. And the more we endeavor to embrace this change, good and bad, because all things have polarity, plus and minus, dark and light, everything is contrast. The cosmic clock works on very large cycles. We're told the Kali Yuga runs 25,000 years. When you zoom your consciousness down to the state of an insect, things begin to operate in very rapid succession. Everything's very quick. Everything moves very fast. We as humans have the ability to scale our consciousness, to scale our interaction with our time in a way that enables us to also scale with the movement of time, because time itself is also compressing as we move into this new consciousness. As somebody who did extensive studies into the Bible, it was not lost on me that there's one book in the New Testament book of Revelation that says time is no more. In other words, there's a point where everything is stillness, where everything does collapse in on itself, but that point of collapse is also the point at which humanity and the cosmos themselves begin a new creation cycle. This planet, the people on it, and the consciousness itself are in a constant state of change, and we're at a point right now where we are going into the deepest part of the changes that humanity was scheduled to have. Light and dark, good and bad, and in it all, what we do is we choose the path that best serves us and serves our fellow human beings as we move forward. We'll talk about this some more in some upcoming shows. I'm Randy Maugans. This is Off-Planet Radio Live. We'll be back next Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the Liberty Beacon Network. Stay focused. The truth is out there. It's inside you. Good night.
This is Off-Planet Radio.